So hello, everybody who has been here for some time, and welcome to the Regen Ag Fundamentals webinar hosted by Calm the Farm. And we are so lucky to have two incredible panelists, Russell Heald from the Brow Dairies in Norsewood and Greg Barclay, founder of Soil Connection, a regenerative coaching business. And I'll let them both introduce themselves shortly, but first up, we'll do some housekeeping. We'll be recording this webinar for anybody who is interested, for those of you that may have not been able to attend, or if you want to be watching it again. And the first half of the webinar, we'll be doing a Q&A that's moderated with some of the questions that we had been getting in previously from some of the different social media events that we were doing. And before opening it up to the audience for about 20 minutes of Q&A, so feel free to add your questions in the, if you just click on the Q&A, pop your question in there, get them going. And then once we've done our first little moderated section, we'll pull in from those questions there. Yeah, we'll be ending the webinar at 1 p.m. sharp. And finally, a huge thank you to Icebreaker, because they've provided us with some swag and some excellent giveaways, both for panelists and some lucky attendees. We'll be having a contest afterwards for that. So getting started, let's meet Russell. So I think a great way to find out more about you, Russell, is to find out about how did you first become curious about regenerative agriculture?
So we've been involved with on the Regen Ag journey for about coming up 5 years. So prior to that, we had sort of always been interested in doing things slightly differently anyway, and we're going down that biological pathway. And then we just came across Greg. He was working with a local farmer just up the road from us, and we went and saw what he was doing there and had our first consult with him and just jumped on board, and yeah, never looked back. So just really enjoying the journey that we're on at the moment.
That's awesome. And what does a typical workday look like for you on the farm? I know you guys are calving right now.
Yeah, so calving at the moment. So I leave home at about 7:30, and which is not sort of typical for most dairy farmers. We're once a day. So we're all about work-life balance and family time. And so yeah, I get to have breakfast with Charlotte and the kids before I go to work. And yeah, it works really well for us.
Cool. And how is that different than what was happening before?
So before, I'd be up at 4:30 and gone and checking springers and getting milkers and colostrums in and cows and calves, and just pretty much got to that point where I'd in the spring we'd just hardly see the kids and just gone in the dark, home in the dark, and something had to change. So we made the switch to once a day, and then it was probably only 6 months after that we come across Greg and started down our Regen pathway. So yeah, it's everything's fitted in really nicely.
That's awesome. I'm also curious to hear about, how did your grazing management look like before you went on this journey, and how's it changed now?
So it's been a massive mindset shift for us in terms of all the grazing. We were pretty much rye and clover prior to going down our Regen pathway before we put all our pasture diversity in, so 9+ species. So we are running sort of 18 to 22 to 25 day rounds, and spraying on nitrogen, and just high stocking rate, which is not high. We're only around 2.7 to 3. We're down now around that sort of 2.3. But we found we were just constantly just chasing our tail. We'd go through a spell where we wouldn't have any rain for 2 or 3 weeks, and then we'd have to start feeding out, and just created more workload and just more expenses. Whereas now with having the pasture diversity, and we're able to push our rounds out to kind of a minimum 40-day rounds pretty much most of the year, and we get through into November and go from a 40-day to around a 50-day round, and just hold that going through the summer. And the reasons for doing that is just to hold that cover, so we're not having to be feeding out, which helps reduce those expenses. But it's also the benefits of having those longer covers and higher residuals, for what it's doing for our soil. So yeah, that's working really well for us.
It sounds like a lot of changes in the last few years. Was it ever overwhelming?
Yeah, it did. Like there's been a few points where we've sort of questioned what we're doing, but we've just stuck to it and just had patience with it, just given it that time. Yeah, and we've definitely seen the benefits of it. Yeah.
Awesome. And Greg, tell us about yourself and how you first became curious about this thing called regenerative agriculture.
It's probably a longer story for me, because regenerative agriculture is probably, the terminology is only fairly recent for me. For my background's born and bred dairy farming, and it was in the late 90s, it was probably all through the 90s, I started questioning a lot of actions that I was doing on the farm and watching the cause and effect through to the animals. And because at the time I was 50-50 share milking, so I changed from into farmed on 3 different properties on quite distinct different soil types. And you notice some marked differences in the performances of the same herd. So there was always that curiosity, why is that? And why is this farm, I'm able to get quite good production out of per cow, and then the next farm you're really battled. So it was a learning curve of for me for over 20 years. So it's and at that stage I started learning and questioning, and my real probably stage moment for me that was the catalyst for where I've had to learn and to where it can help farmers today was back in the late 90s, where it was just started mating. So we were milking 750 cows, and the cows were out. I went to shut them in that morning after the morning milking, and they were hop deep in grass. So we had plenty of grass to eat, but they were starving. They were losing weight. They weren't cycling. We had quite a number of mastitis issues in lame cows, etc. And that was the time where I just totally consciously and subconsciously decided I needed to work it out. Something's got to change. And at that time, there was a guy that I had played rugby with in the early 20s. He thought differently. His name is Ewan Campbell. And he had some quite good ideas of animal health and free choice supplementation, which I got involved with, and we made really fast changes to the animal performance on the farm. But from that, it became, why can't we get it in the daily diet in the animals? Because supplementation does work to a point, but it's not the end of the world. But through that, then I started reading books, and one of the other main catalysts for me was Brown Trotter's book. If anyone hasn't read that, it can be worth a read. Minerals for your farming wealth and your own health, or something. That's an unusual title, but essentially he farmed through the 50s and 60s and learned a lot about minerals and soils, and that was curious to me as why I hadn't been taught that as a young farmer. And obviously internet was just starting then, but it wasn't really functional, but books were, and Acres USA is another wonderful publication that provides a lot of books. So I got into doing some reading, but obviously when you're milking 750 cows twice a day, time for reading wasn't that available. But I did manage to get some books in and started learning, and then met Ewan's brother, David, who was farming down in Rotherham, in North Canterbury at that time, doing some remarkable things. And then sort of met some other farmers around the country, doing out of the ordinary stuff, but getting some extraordinary results. And no one had really worked it out as far as, I don't think we'll ever work it out totally. Natural systems are far too complex, but nowadays we've got wonderful publications, and anything that Charles Walters has ever authored is worth reading. But it was just really through trial and experimentation and watching, and then I got involved with helping other farmers, and of course the responsibility of that, maintaining their financial survival, while they're making changes away from what they're doing ordinarily, is a responsibility you take on quite heavily. So, so it's a matter of working out what needs to be done from a farmer side of things. And now with our internet and podcasts, and the person I probably relate most to in this day and age would be John Kemp. His comprehension of natural systems is better than anyone else I've ever come across. And probably the only thing that we've managed to do here in Aotearoa is that we have probably worked out a very practical and economic way of making these transitions happen now, because there's certainly multiple ways you see people approach it. So it's been a long-term thing. So regenerative has really just been in the last few years, but it does fit well with functioning. And probably I've ended up in the organic space in dairying, although I have personal and experience on obviously in the higher country sheep and beef situation, and starting to do a bit of work in the horticultural sector as well.
That's cool. So what I'm hearing there is that there was a host of community and other farmers and resources that you were able to learn from and lean into. I'd like to hear about what advice you might have for farmers moving from that theory to operationalizing a change on their farm. Like I hear a lot of, I've listened to YouTube videos, I've met some other farmers, I've read some books, I've listened to some podcasts. But what's that first step to starting to move into this space?
A great question, because I know with going to seminars with Christine Jones and Arden Anderson and Graham Sate and Nicole Masters, who are just wonderful educators and so knowledgeable in the space of biological farming. I was never able to transition from that and just go into getting some really good outcomes on farms. And I've not really seen a lot of other people do that either. So it's a matter of finding someone that's got some practical experience and having a look at, if you like what they are doing, and if you like the outcomes that they've created, then copy them. Farming's really unique in that it seems to be non-competitive, or we actually benefit from everyone learning and propping everyone up. There's not a competitive advantage for one farmer to be doing exceptionally well and another farmer not. So it's a really unique environment and encouraging sharing what they're doing.
Cool. And Russell, how would you answer that question? What were your first steps after watching some videos, reading some books, and listening to some podcasts?
Our first steps was basically getting the pasture diversity and getting that 9+ species going, which enabled us to run the longer rounds and just push those higher covers and higher residuals. And then, it was just a and then getting those free choice minerals into the cows and just allowing them to balance themselves. It was amazing to actually just sit back and observe what they were doing and how they were behaving. And that's been a real key one for me, like working with Greg, is just sitting back and having patience and learning to observe. We just, even this time of the year, it's just taking that time to go and lock your cows away and just walk through them. Just don't rush, because as most farmers at this time of the year, there's so much to be done and keep an eye on and keep track of, that we tend to just overlook some of that finer detail and that attention to detail, and we overlook that sort of way of observing. So for us on farm here, we'll go and lock our cows away and spend 5 minutes walking through them, and just so we can keep an eye on them and see what's happening, what's going on, and what cows are doing and how they're behaving. And it's amazing what you pick up on.
Awesome. Now, also thinking about what I was hearing from Greg is that, seeing what other people were doing is so incredibly important. Can you talk a little bit about how a community of practice might influence what you do, or what part it plays in your farming?
That a big thing for us was and what I always say to people, you've got to go and like see it to believe it. And that was for us. Like we went up to, and the farm up the road from us, that was started a year, basically a year ahead of us. So we went and had a look around there to see what was happening there, and just, yeah, you could see the benefits already. So, and then there's been a flow on effect, like farmers that have come to us and seen what we're doing, and all of a sudden, like people are just starting to make those changes on farm from what they're coming and seeing.
That's awesome. Greg, we have somebody asked again for the details of the book. Can I get you to give me the name of the author again, and we can look that up and put a link in?
Or anything that Charles Walters has wrote, and yeah, there's any number of books, but that Weeds and Weeds Control Without Poisons, probably a fabulous book. It doesn't just cover plants, it covers the whole raft of things. But
cool.
Yeah, we can provide lists of all sorts.
Cool. So if maybe Carly, if we can get that up, we can put it in the chat later on so people can see the link to what it is. The next question I have, I'll see if either of you are able to answer this one, because we get this one a lot in our inbox at Calm the Farm, which is, what is the alternative technology that I can use instead of glyphosate? I'm needing a herbicide. I'm trying different things. I'm trying to avoid tillage. Is there anything out there that you've been seeing? I know I've been seeing on the John Kemp podcast, some people are playing around with boric acid. I'm curious if you have anything in your toolbox that might not have been out in the open.
I think in terms of that, like a big thing for us, like we're also organic on our farm, is actually just making the most of opportunities. So if you've got a paddock that you've either heavily grazed or done a bit of damage on, is to be able to get the drill in and just make the most of that opportunity and drill some species in there. Another time is over the last 3 years, we've had some quite dry spells. So where the traditional ryegrass plants have actually died off, or the pastures have opened up, that's given us an opportunity to go in there and do something to it. So we've just gone in and undersown, and so there's different ways and means of going about it without having to resort to spraying the paddock out with glyphosate.
Awesome. So you're just observing as to when the opportunity might be there to do a replanting or reseeding.
Basically, yeah.
Greg, do you have any tricks up your sleeve?
Yes and no. I have no fear of cultivation if it's done at the right time of the year and done sensibly. And there's a number of good tools, but good surface cultivation, not going deep, is the best outcome. Now, even talking with long-term grain growers and croppers, they get their best yields when they cultivate, not from a spray and drill. So, and we're seeing that, whatever opportunity you've got to create to get that new seedling in the ground and get it going. But ultimately, it depends what tools are available to the farmer. Obviously, whether there's stones involved. It's just a matter of working out the solution. But we've tried around using concentrated seawater with acetic acids, and they do defoliate. They'll put the plants into summer dormancy very quickly, but they don't tend to kill the systemic roots of those plants. So they'll recover with good growing conditions again, but they can check it enough to give a result. But you need sunshine and a bit of heat for them to activate, which if you're spring cultivating and trying to do something in the spring, that's not, there's not usually enough heat available for you to do that. So there are some strategies. The good thing about acetic acids is they help mineral or solubilize a lot of metals that are in the soil and make them a lot more available, which is really quite helpful. We can't use those in an organic space. But ultimately, we find just with good cultivation, it's our best outcomes every single time, where we try to make shortcuts with spraying and drilling. We can, I've definitely seen some good results out of that, but they're still not as good as a good cultivation.
It's interesting. This is the important thing that I keep hearing. Ooh, somebody's echoing. The important thing I keep hearing is that if you're an organic producer and you have some of the tools out of the toolbox that you're not able to use, you have to find different strategies. And so if all the tools are available and you can observe to see which one might be most useful for you at the time.
Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. And we've been having a lot of questions around multi-species pastures and seeding. And the questions around that we're getting are, what are your choices, or how do you make the decision as to which grasses, legumes, and forbs and herbs to plant based on how your soil health is doing, with how your fungi and worms and bacteria are already functioning? If you're able to talk us through how you make those choices, that would be awesome.
You want to go first, Russ?
Yeah, can do. Yep. So basically for us, like we've worked with Greg and developed like the right species that's going to work for our farm, and it typically works pretty much right across like most regions around New Zealand. It's so it's just at 9+ species, and yeah, at different times of the year, like depending on our grazing management determines on what's going to be growing best at that time of the year. Yeah, so through the summer when we can run those longer rounds, like our clovers and so all our legumes and forbs are going to do really well through that time. Yeah, so and then through that winter and or autumn and winter, it's a lot of the grasses tend to come into their own, and through that spring, so it changes. The farm looks differently through different times of the year.
Yeah, from what the mixes, how they've been developed, is really based on Jerry Brunetti's nutritional profile for a ruminant. And then there's also seasonal growers in that. So we want to have our autumn, summer, spring and winter plants that grow. And there's definitely some symbiotic relationships that happen within those different plants, those different seasonal plants, and they the different sugars that each create help support the next season's iteration as well. So it's and everything, we don't take the chance as well that those new plants, we're going to spend the money to put them in, and we make sure that there's the mycorrhizal fungal that's robust, that are sown with them, and also bacteria that will support them as well. So an answer to, do we actually look or do I look to see whether what fungi is there, whether we're in a fungal environment or a bacterial environment to what we plant? The answer is probably no. We're trying to balance that out through the plants and through the organisms that we seed with the plants to get that system more functional. So it doesn't seem to matter what is there to start with. If there's no doubt we can just work within systems that are already there and make them improved, but in a dairying situation, it's totally economically viable to put those new species in, and the difference in the performance of the farm would be, it could be up to 100% different improvement in it. So it's totally worthwhile doing it.
Can you tell me a little bit about what conditions might have to be present before somebody might start thinking about spending money on seeds, or what conditions would definitely have to not be present for you to move forward with reseeding some pastures?
Probably whether or not you could get a machinery over it. If it's not practical to put machinery over it, there's other ways of putting seed in the ground, whether we feed them direct to stock and let them shift it around through them shutting it out. And we can broadcast some species. Some species, just those round waxy seeds, broadcast very well. But to not do it would be really where the farmer wasn't prepared to change their grazing management. If they were, say, set stocked, still using herbicides for weed control, things like that, and they didn't have the cash flow to make any changes, then it's pointless spending money on seed.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a little bit about, Russell, when you've had experiences when your seeding has gone better than expected, and what conditions might have been present when your seeding went less well than expected?
A lot of that just comes down to the weather and conditions at the time of sowing. So it's just like at the moment, we've got a perfect opportunity to get in. Even though we've just had snow 3 days ago, it's like 2 days later, it was 18 degrees and soil temp's still sitting at 9 degrees. So for us to get in and get some new seeds in the ground early is just a bonus for us. Like we don't normally do any sowing until kind of late September, early October. So it's just really making the most of that opportunity when it arises. So it's yeah.
Awesome. It's not on a calendar. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've got a question here from the audience. Gray has asked or says, a farm system is complex. We hear lots of stories about the benefits for soil, herbage, and the animals, but for a resilient farm system, we can't ignore financial performance. Can we share concrete financial benchmarks to complete the story? So can you tell us a little bit, Russ, about how you feel your farm's finances have changed as you've moved through this process, and how you feel your financial resilience has changed?
Yeah, there's been like financially, we've been able to do everything out of cash flow. So fertilizer's probably gone down probably $50 to $100 a hectare. We dropped 200K out of our feed bill, but the biggest change for us was probably our once a day. That dropped probably 15% of production. But probably the biggest impact that we have overall is still the weather on our production overall. But financially, yeah, we've been able to do everything out of cash flow. For reseeding, we've got 85% of the farm in diverse species now. And then fertilizer, we're still spending around that $350, $400 a hectare on our fertilizer.
So what's your cost of production for your milk solid? How has it changed over time as you've gone to this?
It's probably been reasonably similar. Like we've dropped certain expenses, but then some expenses have gone up, but that's due to just dropping like a drop in production. So then that gets caught up with rising it, and when you compare it to a cost of per kilo of milk solids.
Cool. We also have a question here from Peter, who's asked, have either of you heard about Biodynamic Pasture Management published by Acres USA? Is that a book that's on either of your lists?
Oh, I haven't read it, but I've heard of it. And yeah, the Acres USA is they put out a phenomenal amount of material. And there's, with biological systems, the thing that I've observed around the country, there's definitely some soil types that we can just manage what they have got. And they have the seed bank there too. If we get the biology going, the seed bank is present for some of these very desirable species. But there's definitely some other parts of the country that, due to the geology, that they just do not have that seed bank present. And going back to Gray's question on the economics, putting the new seeds in, it does cost money, but the seed mixes that we use cost pretty much the same as what conventional farmers are using on their seed. The permanent mixes are around that $200 to $230 a hectare. Obviously, there's cultivation and or reseeding costs to go on top of that. But if we don't do that, we don't get the biology working as quickly. That ability for those different species, how the sugars they produce to be able to feed the biology and get that functioning as quickly as possible is, this whole thing of how do we create good soils, we actually get it from having healthy plants. It's something I've been challenged with for years, that chicken and egg thing. To me, it's our healthy plants make soil, and it will particularly make active soil. And it's just an action we can, and I've definitely seen it and done it with giving perfect base saturations in soils with good mineral balance, and the soil or the farm is still non-functional in a biological sense. So, and yet now we've got, like Russell's farm, for example, has got some good biology working in it. Mineralogy wise, he'd done a bit of work on that, which was good, but it's still got a long way to go towards getting some of those Albert optimums there. But it's not super essential. We can actually have quite a high functioning farm without having a perfect mineral makeup. So yeah, the biology side, and particularly when we're looking in some parts of Australia and Africa, and definitely parts of the United States that were natural pasture lands, we didn't have a lot here. There obviously was some, but most of it was in our bush environment. So yeah, a lot of our biology came in initially from seeds that were imported here in the very early stages. And some of it has survived, particularly on some of our hill country, but a lot of it's been fried through our modern chemical applications. So, and going back to earlier, it's not cost prohibitive to re-establish those. So.
Awesome. Russ, we have a question here from Lindsay asking, where do native and exotic trees fit into regen ag farming? And I think you're the perfect person to ask this question of.
Yeah, so we've just gone down that pathway of getting into putting more trees and shelter belts and more plants on farm. Like we've just finished this year, we've put in 3,000 natives, and then we've just finished putting in some Tasmanian blackwoods and some more gums. I've got more poplars going in and more toijois going in. So it's all around just creating diversity on farm. So for us, like our vision for our farm is to basically create it as a food forest over the next 5 to 10 years. So it's having multiple different species of trees and plants over the farm. So the toijois act as a shelter, but they also act as a fodder source for cows. And then the poplars are there for shade and shelter, as well as all the leaf matter drop. And then we've got we've got timber trees going in. So we've got gums and the Tasmanian blackwood for timber. And then the natives are mainly around all our riparian planting and all our wetland areas that we've fenced off. So that's, and then we've got over the next sort of few years, we'll start putting more fruit and nut trees around through the shelter belts as well. So, but our biggest aim was to have 5 to 10 trees on every fence line throughout the farm. So it's
awesome. And I'd love to dig into that a bit more because your passion for reforesting your farm is immense. And I know we were just out at the farm recently where my husband put boots on the ground and got a few in. And curious as to how you're thinking of the trees as supporting the dairy farm, or are you thinking of putting in the trees as supporting the biodiversity of the area, or is it all the same thing? Just I'd love you to take us through that.
It's all interconnected. So we're just probably next autumn, we're going to start working with Shane Ward from Action Ecology around really what to plant and where. So we'll put work with him and design a farm plan to sort of carry on from what we're already doing. So it's just understanding what goes where in terms of even the wind evaporation for our pastures and our trees and shrubs that we've already got in, and how that affects the our pastures. And yeah, so it's looking forward to sort of getting that underway with Shane. So we've had him on farm before, and yeah, he's he's an awesome guy to work with. So we're looking forward to that.
Cool. And Greg, what's your thinking on native and exotic trees on dairy farms? Where do they fit in?
They're essential, really. There's some of our natives are, quite conducive for pastures growing around underneath them. Kowhai and Totara seem to encourage good growth around them quite happily. There's a whole heap of subtle biology that live not just on the roots, but on the leaves of all our plants, and the trees just offer up another opportunity for diversity in that space. And we've have that thinking of non-productive areas or non-productive things. I'm not so sure nature ever looks at it and everything's productive. And we just need to look at it and observe it in a different way that acknowledges the roles that everything does. Yeah, so no, anyone that's ever had, I quite like the deciduous trees mixed in amongst as well. They offer up another chance with their root systems and fungal systems they operate under, and the leaf drop, how that operates. You can often see exponential growth at particular times of year in and around those trees. So yeah, hugely beneficial, not just for shade and shelter. It's actually for a lot of the biology side of things.
We have a question coming in too, asking about how regenerative ag fits in with the Three Waters Reform Program or the impact of climate change on current water infrastructure. And just thinking of trees and all of the different water infiltration services that they provide flows through nicely. So can you give us your thoughts, Greg, on that?
Yeah, you'd sort of, I mean, the hydrological cycles that operate in the soils are incredibly important. I mean, the Three Waters, as far as what I understand, is more about our the potable drinking water and the wastewater, etc., in urban areas. But once we get that soil living and it actually has all the life forms working in it, it works far more like a sponge and holds that those heavy downfalls, slows them down from entering into our drainage systems as quickly. And of course, then we've got the water vapor cycling. So, and that whole thing, that's, I suppose, how we sort of view things now. Everything needs to function in a cycle for it to be effective. If water's parked somewhere, or carbon's parked somewhere, or nitrogen's parked somewhere, and it's not cycling, then it's dysfunctional. So, yeah, as far as, sort of regenerative agriculture, as long as it's used to encourage the biological systems within plants, living plants and soils, and in and on and around those leaves of plants, then it can definitely help within our water management, and for a real huge positive effect. But it's a community thing. It's not just the farmers. It's everybody, and our regional councils. Bacteria is the second most prevalent carbon compound on Earth other than plants. And when we're spraying our herbicides around, they work as an antibiotic effect. So they don't just hinder the beneficial bacteria that operate in the soil. It's the same on the leaf of the plants, and then obviously in the gut microbiota of animals and humans.
Russell, I'm wondering if you could weigh in on the water cycling on your farm. So here we're asking about all the different benefits and the impacts of climate change on current water infrastructure that regenerative farming has. Can you tell us about what you've seen on your farm?
So yeah, some of the, like from what we've observed, so when we've had some heavy downpours, a big thing we've noticed is just like the streams are still running clear, even after 2 inches of rain, like within a sort of 12 to 24 hour period. It's just, and then also the less amount of pooling in paddocks, like we're just not having the pooling anymore, so we're getting that water infiltration in, and then it's just, and also just, it's hard, we haven't measured our water holding capacity, but yeah, I'm quite keen to work that out to see actually what we are holding on to. So then it's every time we get in that rain, it's that utilization of every drop basically, and stopping it from running off and taking sediment and nutrients with it.
Awesome. Another question here. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Aaron, I was talking to a farmer yesterday down at Murchison who's only been on that farm for 5 years. He did some new drainage when he got there and was using 500 pipes. And in the first year, they were not able to hold the capacity of the heavy rainfalls they get down there. But they had 500 odd mil in the last week, and he said the pipes have handled it fine now. So just in that time, a short time frame of improving soil and activity has been able to mitigate a lot of that stormwater pressure.
So I guess when we're talking about current water infrastructure and how regenerative agriculture might fit into it, bringing back the true capacity of that current water infrastructure by increasing the water holding capacity on the landscape would be a massive effect. I was going to say flow on effect. Awesome. I've got another question here which asks, there we go. Does regenerative agriculture have any relationship with working with iwi and Maori interests and the potential to use green or cultural infrastructure such as retiring farmland for wetlands?
Has massive opportunity. Yeah, the Maori space are definitely looking into this way of farming quite strongly, but I can see where some of the holdups are in it as well. The farming skill set within Maori have been disassociated with obviously the land being confiscated, and over the last 20 years sort of accumulating that back into a functional business. But in that time frame, they've offset their farming knowledge to farm advisory services, and they run very safe, conservative, conventional mechanisms. But in the last few years, it's definitely starting to get down that track of skilling up of the beneficiaries within each of the whenua trusts, and trying to take back those real farming values that had been scattered and dysfunctioned. So huge opportunity, whether it's wetlands and going back into, I still think pasture lands has an opportunity to operate as the start of the wetlands and that soaking up period. There's definitely some areas that we need to reutilize as true wetlands, but pastoral areas can operate far better in that space than they currently are as well.
That makes me wonder what would need to happen for, especially on dairy land, which generally is the flats and the most valuable of farmland to be acquired. What would need to happen for some of those lands to be returned and retired into wetlands, if that is what is best for the community or the area?
Good question. It depends on what its current economic return value is, or net return value is at this point in time. But yeah, this whole thing with using wetlands as a way of being the kidneys or liver systems to filter before it enters our rivers is needed. But if we don't put a lot of those toxic material on at the top of the water chain, then we're not having to filter it out to the same degree down the bottom. So yeah, I think it's, we've seen that from riparian planting. It's not changing our water quality anywhere near to the state that it should be. And I mean, Ray Archuleta has that wonderful statement or phrase, and that our rivers and lakes are full of environmental and conservation plans. They're not crystal clear with understanding, and it's just so apt for anywhere in the world, but particularly for here. So.
I'm curious if on your farm, Russ, you have any sections that you're considering retiring, or I'm also interested to hear about the decision-making around the riparian environments that you fenced off and the wetlands that you fenced off.
Yeah, so over the last probably 18 months, we've done about 17 kilometres of fencing. And that's just been sort of, we just went around the farm and assessed sort of those, I don't know if you'd call them higher risk areas in terms of like our waterways, and a lot of them didn't have water flowing all year round, but they were still areas that would benefit in other ways from having them fenced off and having them planted. And so yeah, we've gone around and done a whole lot of that, and just highlighted those higher risk areas in terms of that water quality. Like, so we're keeping cows out of those sort of wetland areas and keeping them fenced off, and over time, like eventually all of them will be planted. So yeah, we've probably got room for at least another 20,000 natives to go in. But yeah, it's just we've been pretty fortunate to work with Horizons Regional Council with getting all that fencing and planting done. They've been really supportive and awesome to work with in terms of going down that pathway.
And considering our previous question as well about the finances and it having to make sense, can you tell me how it works in your budgets, or if you had to consider removing land from production to move into wetland or riparian environment, and how that might have affected your bottom line?
It's actually benefited us, like it's by getting some of those, like a few of the paddocks, like we've fenced off all those little wetland areas, and it's actually enabled us to have a better grazing management through those paddocks. So it's so we're getting benefits through that, through better grazing management and just keeping those cows out of those high risk areas.
Awesome.
And then we're also like creating an environment for other for where the trees and stuff are, where they're planted. It's creating that biodiversity on farm. So it's we're getting shade and shelter, but there's also a food source for bees and birds there as well. So
awesome. We have a question here wondering how fungi, worms, and bacteria play a role in the success of the pasture species that you plant.
Yeah, it plays a massive role, because of that whole premise of, you know, whether we want to call it regenerative farming or biological farming. If we're switching, a lot of chemical, or our conventional farmers are in a chemical space, so water soluble type fertility, whereas we're wanting to go into a biological, you know, trading sense. Those plants can only operate in that space with, you know, fungi embedded itself into the roots, and bacteria operating both on the roots and on the leaf, so, and on the surface of the soil as well. So yeah, huge role, because we're able to, because we're not solubly feeding them other than through probably what's coming out of the back end of the animals, probably only soluble nutrient that's available to those plants. It's the longevity of those plants is totally reliant on how well it can build those relationships with the fungi and bacteria.
Russell, have you had any personal experiences with how the life in the soil has been changing what happens to be able to come up in your multi-species pastures?
Yeah, we did some autumn sowing back in March and April of this year, and it was really interesting to go and dig up after probably only about 4 or 5 days after sowing, and went and just checked on what was happening with the new seeds. And it was incredible to see some of the seeds that had already put their roots down up to 2 inches, and the new roots were just covered in the rhizosphere. Like, it was just amazing to see. So that was before they even germinated. So they've got that natural protection and that natural symbiotic relationship already with the soil before they're even coming up. So yeah, that was amazing to see that. And because all of our seeds come dusted in a van, which is a mycorrhizae fungi. So I was quite stoked when I dug up and saw that happening.
That's amazing. So even before the first leaves came out and started feeding the life in the soil understood that this was going to be a future food source. So protected those roots all the way down. Amazing. Yep. That's really cool. What would you say, Russ, is the one thing that someone could do that might greatly increase their chances of success when moving to this new system of farming?
It's just going out and seeing what other farmers are doing. Like, that's the biggest thing you can do, is just go and see it to believe it, and then just work out what you can do on your farm in terms of the process of how you go about sort of making that transition to a regen system. It's and just what you can put into place. But yeah, definitely just going and seeing it, and just talking to people. Like, that's all we did. Like, I just researched and talked to different people about what was happening and what they were doing, and then just that's how we sort of got going.
Cool. And Greg, is there one thing that you can think of that somebody might do to greatly increase their chances of success?
I wish there was only one, but no, I think totally agree with what Russell said. It's just be very good at observing. If one thing, need to do one thing that everyone should improve on is their observations. Observe what happens, what doesn't happen. To let why do the cows push on the fence and or the sheep to try and eat what's on the roadside? Why aren't they happy with what's in their paddock or whatever? So just be good observers.
Awesome. My next question is, it's a twofold question. Do you find that regen farming is becoming more or less popular? And I'd like to discuss the usefulness of the term regenerative farming in this space when it means so many different things.
Go, Russ.
Yeah, like there definitely is a lot more people starting to sort of be more open and sort of curious about what's going on. Like it's yeah, I definitely get a lot of people even just ringing and talking to me about what we're doing and how we're going about that. So it's yeah, there's definitely a lot more farmers out there that are getting curious about the regenerative farming systems.
Cool. What are you seeing, Greg?
Yes, it's for the last probably 30 years. It's always been there. There's always been that curiosity and sharing between farmers. I think the biggest change we've had is probably modern technology, like how we're communicating right now, and and obviously with podcasts and YouTube and things like that. That wasn't available 15 years ago. So I think it's probably just becoming a little bit more easily shared, and we can share anywhere around the world now quite easily. So from that, I think we're probably gonna be able to break through that threshold of tipping point, because you go back to what Brown Trotter was doing in the 50s and 60s, and a lot of what work was being done with William Albrecht and with Charles Walters, and this isn't a new thing, but I think it's getting a lot better organised and more succinct in how we can operate. So yeah, but there's definitely a more openness to looking at, and whether that's being pushed from environmental and compliance pressures on farms. But I struggle to think that it's new, put it that way.
It's an excellent point, I think, of when you're talking about the new technology allowing us to communicate more freely. I think of quorum sensing in the soil, and as soon as everybody knows that there's others out there they can share information with, new things come up, new discoveries come up much more quickly because the conversation is there.
Yeah.
Interesting. Russell, I got a question from you from Dylan, who's wondering, how much has your animal health costs changed since the switch? And do you have any issues with certain plants tainting the milk like mustard?
So in terms of costs, like we've definitely had a massive reduction in animal health costs. And that's just come through building healthier soils and that flow-on effect from healthier plants and building that immunity and having healthier animals. And it's so we're able to just support their immune system. Like we've had cows come in with a bit of mastitis at the moment, and we work with Phyllis Titchenen from True Health. So we use some different tinctures and different oils and rubs that we use, and that's just all about supporting the cow's own natural immune system to be able to actually fight off those bugs. So rather than just always thinking about treatment, like a big focus for us is actually about prevention. So we're stopped with the main focus for us on farmers, stopping those cows from basically falling off the cliff, and then having to worry about how we treat them. So yeah, by offering the free choice minerals and having that pasture diversity in there, taking all those synthetics and chemicals out of our system has given us stronger, healthier cows.
Cool. I'm also hearing, when you're talking about all of the people that you've been chatting with, that you really have a team surrounding you in this journey. So you have the farmers that you've been chatting with in your area, who you've gone to see this working with. You're working with Greg, and I hear Shane is going to be coming out and Phyllis gives you advice. How long did it take you to find all of these team members that are helping with this?
I think when you put yourself out there and you start going down that pathway, then just naturally you're going to attract those right people into your environment. Like the right people that you need will just, they'll come to you, or you'll find them somehow in some way. And that's just through communicating with other people and other farmers, like what's working for them and what's not, and who do they go to, and where do they find their information, and so that's kind of how we've gone about what we've done. And so we've developed an amazing team of people around us, so it's to support what we're doing with our business.
That's amazing. And I wanted to thank both you and Russell and Greg, because we're running out of time. We're almost finished for the day, and we have answered all the questions that have come in, and I thank you for your time so immensely. It's been great to have you participate for the very first webinar. And as a small gesture of our appreciation, we have some wicked goodies from the folks at Icebreaker that will be coming your way. And for all attendees, we'll be sending you out a short survey at the conclusion of the webinar. So if you'd like the chance to win some Icebreaker swag, submit your responses. And remembering that this is going to be a monthly event now. So next month, keep an eye out for registration. We are going to have Jules Matthews, who is a sheep and beef farmer pastoral specialist, and Chantel Fisher, who works with Soil Matters, joining our panel. So keep those questions coming in via Calm the Farm. Let us know if you have any questions you'd like to ask them next month. And if you wanted to get in touch with Calm the Farm directly, please email info@calmthefarm.nz. So thank you so much, guys. We're going to end the webinar, and you have a great rest of your week.
Cool, thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you,
See ya.
Greg.
Yeah.